On February 13th, 2017, the small town of Delphi, Indiana, woke up to what seemed like an ordinary winter day. With a population of fewer than 3,000 people, Delphi was the kind of place where neighbors knew each other by name, where children walked freely, and where violent crime felt like something that happened somewhere else. It was quiet, familiar, and safe, or at least it had always felt that way. By the end of that day, everything would change forever. Liberty German and Abigail Williams were two middle school girls enjoying an unexpected day off from school. Classes had been canceled, and like many kids their age, they wanted to spend the afternoon outside. Liberty, known to everyone as Libby, was 14 years old. She was confident, outspoken, and creative, with a love for photography and social media. Abby, just 13, was quieter and more reserved, artistic and thoughtful, with a gentle personality that balanced Libby's energy perfectly. The girls were close friends, inseparable in the way only young teenagers can be, bonded by trust, laughter, and shared dreams. That afternoon, Libby asked her older sister for a ride to the Monon High Bridge Trail, a popular hiking spot just outside town. The bridge itself was an abandoned railroad bridge, long out of service but still standing, stretching across Deer Creek. Locals knew it well. Some avoided it because of its height and narrow wooden planks, while others were drawn to it for the views and the sense of adventure. It wasn't unusual for teenagers to walk the trail, take photos, and post them online. It was familiar. It was normal. At around 1:45 p.m., Libby and Abby were dropped off near the trailhead. The weather was cold, but clear. The girls walked along the path, talking, laughing, and taking pictures. At one point, Libby snapped a photo of Abby walking across the bridge, her hands in her pockets, her face calm and unaware. Libby later posted the image to Snapchat. That photo would become one of the last known images of Abby alive. As the girls continued their walk, something changed. Investigators believe Libby noticed a man approaching them on the bridge. There was something about him that made her uncomfortable. Instead of panicking, instead of running, Libby did something remarkable. She turned on her phone's camera. Quietly and discreetly, she recorded video as the man walked toward them. The clip was short and grainy, but it captured a figure that would haunt the nation for years to come. A man wearing a blue jacket, jeans, and a hat, his hands in his pockets, his face partially obscured. Along with the video came audio. 3 words: calm, firm, and terrifying in their simplicity. "Guys, down the hill." Those words marked the last known moments before the girls were taken. What happened next is something investigators have never fully disclosed. Authorities believe the man forced the girls off the bridge and down a hill toward Deer Creek, away from the trail and out of sight. The exact sequence of events remains sealed, known only to the killer and the victims. What is known is that Libby and Abby never made it home. By early evening, their families realized something was wrong. When the girls didn't arrive at the agreed pickup time, concern quickly turned into panic. Family members returned to the trail, calling out their names, hoping they had simply lost track of time or wandered too far. As darkness approached, law enforcement was notified, and a search began. Volunteers, police officers, and relatives spread out across the area, flashlights cutting through the fading light. As the night grew colder, the search was suspended. It was a decision that would later spark debate and criticism, but at the time, authorities believed the girls might have found shelter or gone elsewhere. No one was prepared for what the next day would bring. On February 14th, Valentine's Day, search efforts resumed. Around midday, the bodies of Libby German and Abigail Williams were discovered on private property near Deer Creek, less than a mile from where they were last seen. The discovery sent shockwaves through Delphi and beyond. A tight-knit community was suddenly confronted with unimaginable violence. 2 children had been murdered in broad daylight, in a place everyone believed was safe. Law enforcement quickly classified the deaths as a double homicide. From the beginning, Investigators were unusually tight-lipped about the crime scene. They described it as complex and said that the killer had left behind signatures, details that suggested intent and planning. They refused to release the cause of death, the manner of the killings, or specific evidence found at the scene. This secrecy was meant to protect the investigation, but it also fueled endless speculation. As days turned into weeks, then months, the case captured national attention. In July 2017, authorities released a still image taken from Libby's phone, the man on the bridge. Soon after, they released the audio clip. The public was told plainly and chillingly that this was the voice of the killer. For the first time in modern true crime history, a murderer had been unknowingly recorded by his victims just moments before committing the crime. The man became known simply as Bridge Guy. His image was plastered across television screens, billboards, and social media. Tips poured in from across the country. Everyone seemed to know someone who looked like him, sounded like him, or dressed like him. Yet despite thousands of leads, no arrest was made. In 2019, law enforcement held a press conference that stunned the public. They released a new suspect sketch, dramatically different from the first, and announced that the investigation had taken a new direction. The suspect, they said, might appear younger than previously believed. The killer could be hiding in plain sight. He could be someone the community knew. The announcement created confusion and fear. Which sketch was correct? Was the killer older or younger? Had he been interviewed already? Had he lived in Delphi all along? Years passed with little public progress. The families waited. The town endured. Online sleuths analyzed every frame of video and every syllable of audio, sometimes helping, often harming. Rumors spread. Innocent people were accused, and conspiracy theories flourished. Through it all, investigators insisted the case was not cold, even as time continued to move forward. Then, in October 2022, more than 5 years after the murders, everything changed. Police arrested Richard Allen, a 50-year-old Delphi resident who worked at a local CVS pharmacy. He lived just minutes from the crime scene. According to investigators, Allen had admitted early on that he was on the trail the day the girls were killed. He said he had been there, wearing clothing similar to the man seen in the video. Authorities revealed that an unspent bullet found at the crime scene had been forensically linked to a firearm owned by Allen. The revelation stunned the community. For years, the killer had been the subject of speculation, fear, and endless theories. Now, police were saying he had been hiding in plain sight, working, living, and blending in as the investigation unfolded around him. Allen pleaded not guilty. His arrest marked the beginning of a new phase of the case, one filled with controversy. Defense attorneys raised concerns about his treatment in custody, the conditions of his confinement, and the reliability of alleged confessions. The prosecution, meanwhile, argued that the evidence was overwhelming. Much of the case remains sealed, and legal proceedings are ongoing. As the justice system continues its slow and deliberate process, the story of Libby and Abby remains one of profound loss and haunting bravery. Libby's decision to record that moment on the bridge gave investigators the most critical piece of evidence imaginable. Her presence of mind, in the face of fear, forever changed how law enforcement views digital evidence and victim awareness. Liberty German and Abigail Williams were not just names in a headline. They were daughters, sisters, friends. They had futures filled with possibilities that were stolen in a single afternoon. Their legacy is one of courage, remembrance, and a community forever altered. Delphi will never forget what happened on that bridge. And as the case continues to unfold, the world continues to watch, hoping that justice, true justice, will finally be served. As investigators continued to build their case, more unsettling questions emerged. Questions not only about who committed the murders, but how such a crime could unfold in a public place, in daylight, without immediate detection. The Monon High Bridge Trail was not deserted that day. Other hikers had been present before and after Libby and Abby arrived. Some even reported seeing a man matching the suspect's description. Yet somehow, the encounter on the bridge slipped through the cracks of ordinary memory, unnoticed, until it was too late. Law enforcement later confirmed that multiple witnesses had seen a man on the trail that afternoon, but none realized the significance of the encounter at the time. This detail would become critical years later, as timelines were reconstructed and statements re-examined. It raised a chilling possibility. The killer did not rush. He did not flee in panic. Instead, he appeared calm, controlled, and confident enough to blend back into normal life once the crime was done. For the families of Libby and Abby, the years that followed were defined by waiting for answers, waiting for accountability, waiting for the moment when the voice on the recording would finally have a name and a face attached to it in a courtroom. They attended press conferences, spoke to the media, and pleaded with the public to keep their daughter's story alive. Through grief, they became advocates not only for justice, but for awareness. The case also changed Delphi itself. Parents became more cautious. Children were warned about strangers. A town that once trusted its quiet routines now lived with an undercurrent of fear. The bridge, once a place of curiosity and local pride, became a symbol of tragedy. For many, it was no longer a trail, it was a crime scene frozen in time. As technology advanced, the case took on new relevance. Libby's phone recording was frequently cited in law enforcement training as a powerful example of situational awareness. Her instincts, in those final moments, provided evidence that no witness statement ever could. It forced investigators across the country to rethink how digital evidence could emerge in real time, even from victims themselves. Yet for all the attention the case received, progress remained slow. Each anniversary brought renewed media coverage, fresh speculation, and old pain resurfacing for those closest to the girls. The audio clip, just a few seconds long, became one of the most analyzed recordings in true crime history. Experts debated the tone, the accent, the age of the speaker. Was the voice local? Was it disguised? Did it reveal confidence, anger, or something else entirely? When Richard Allen was arrested, the reaction was immediate and polarized. Some felt relief that an arrest had finally been made, that the long wait might finally be nearing its end. Others expressed skepticism, questioning how such a key suspect could have remained overlooked for so long. The idea that a man who worked at a local pharmacy, a familiar face to many, could be accused of such brutality was deeply unsettling. As court documents slowly became public, it emerged that Allen had reportedly placed himself at the trail on the day of the murders early in the investigation. At the time, this admission did not raise alarms. Years later, however, it would take on enormous significance. Investigators argued that this detail, combined with witness statements, physical evidence, and ballistic analysis, placed him at the center of the crime. The defense countered with claims of investigative failure, mishandled evidence, and undue pressure. They argued that the case against Allen relied too heavily on circumstantial connections and that critical information had been overlooked or misinterpreted. The legal battle that followed became as much about procedure and rights as it was about guilt or innocence. Meanwhile, Libby and Abby's names continued to echo far beyond Indiana. Their story was told in documentaries, podcasts, books, and classrooms. Each retelling served as both remembrance and warning, a reminder of vulnerability, but also of courage. Libby's decision to record was not just an act of evidence gathering. It was an act of resistance, a refusal to disappear quietly. As the case moves through the justice system, one truth remains unchanged. 2 young lives were taken, and nothing can undo that loss. No verdict can restore the futures that were stolen. What it can do, however, is offer accountability and, perhaps, a measure of peace. The Delphi murders are not just a story of crime. They are a story of community, of fear, of resilience, and of the profound impact a single moment can have on countless lives. They remind us that evil does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it walks quietly, hands in its pockets, across a bridge on an ordinary afternoon. And long after the courtroom lights dim and the headlines fade, the memory of Libby German and Abigail Williams will endure etched into history, into a town, and into the collective conscience of all who heard that voice and felt the chill of those three haunting words. As the legal process slowly advanced, the Delphi case became a mirror reflecting broader issues within criminal investigations themselves. Questions were raised not only about the suspect, but about missed opportunities, delayed conclusions, and how a case with such powerful evidence could remain unresolved for so long. Investigators acknowledged that the sheer volume of tips, tens of thousands, had overwhelmed early efforts. Every lead had to be weighed, every possibility considered, and in doing so, crucial details sometimes became buried beneath the noise. Former law enforcement officials and analysts would later suggest that the very uniqueness of the evidence may have complicated the investigation. The video and audio were unprecedented, but they were also incomplete. The man's face was partially obscured. His voice was short and controlled. Rather than narrowing the field instantly, the evidence created an illusion of clarity that masked uncertainty. People believed the suspect should be obvious, instantly recognizable. When he wasn't, frustration grew. That frustration was felt most deeply by the families. For Libby's grandparents and Abby's mother, time seemed to stand still while the rest of the world moved forward. Birthdays passed. School milestones came and went. Each reminder of what should have been became another quiet loss. Yet they continued to speak publicly, not out of obligation, but out of determination. They wanted the world to remember who Libby and Abby were, not just how they died, but how they lived. They spoke of sleepovers, inside jokes, and dreams of the future. Libby wanted to travel. Abby loved art and animals. These details mattered because they restored humanity to a case often reduced to grainy images and courtroom filings. The girls were not symbols or evidence, they were children. Meanwhile, Delphi itself struggled with its identity. For years, the town's name became inseparable from the murders. Outsiders came to see the bridge, some out of respect, others out of curiosity. Locals were torn between preserving normalcy and honoring memory. Memorials appeared, flowers left behind, ribbons tied to fences. The bridge stood silent, a structure that had witnessed laughter, footsteps, and ultimately, violence. Psychological experts analyzing the case often focused on the nature of the encounter. The killer did not rely on speed or surprise alone. Instead, he used authority spoken calmly, without panic. "Guys, down the hill" was not shouted, it was stated. This suggested confidence, familiarity with control, and possibly prior experience exerting dominance. These interpretations added another layer of fear. This may not have been an impulsive act. As discussions turned toward motive, investigators remained careful. They resisted public speculation, emphasizing that understanding motive was less important than securing justice. Still, the silence left room for endless theories. Some believed the crime was planned. Others believed it was opportunistic. The truth, as with many cases, likely lies somewhere in between. When Richard Allen's case entered the courtroom phase, it brought renewed scrutiny to every aspect of the investigation. Defense motions questioned the reliability of witness recollections years after the fact. Prosecutors countered with forensic consistency and timeline alignment. Each hearing reignited public debate, drawing attention back to Delphi and reopening emotional wounds for the families. The handling of Allen's confinement also became a focal point. Reports of isolation and harsh conditions sparked concern among legal observers, prompting arguments about due process and mental health. These concerns did not negate the seriousness of the charges, but they underscored the complexity of pursuing justice while upholding rights. In a case defined by tragedy, even procedure carried emotional weight. As months passed, the case remained a presence rather than a conclusion. It hovered unfinished, unresolved, heavy. For many who followed it closely, the Delphi murders became more than a crime story. They became a reminder of fragility, of how quickly an ordinary day can turn irreversible, of how courage can exist even in the final moments. Libby's phone, a simple object carried by millions of teenagers every day, became one of the most important pieces of evidence in modern criminal history. It symbolized awareness, instinct, and the human drive to be seen, to be heard, even when danger is near. Her actions did not save her life, but they gave voice to truth, and that voice continues to echo. As the story continues to unfold through filings, hearings, and testimony, the world waits not out of morbid curiosity, but out of a shared hope that accountability will finally be complete, that the girls' families will one day hear a verdict that brings clarity, if not closure. Because some wounds never fully heal, some moments never fade, and some stories, like that of Liberty German and Abigail Williams, demand to be remembered not because of how they ended, but because of the courage they showed when it mattered most. The bridge still stands. The trail still winds through the trees, and the town of Delphi continues forward, carrying its past with it. In every quiet afternoon, in every passing footstep, there is remembrance, a promise that these girls will not be forgotten, a promise that their voices captured in a fleeting moment will endure long after the echoes of that day have faded into history. As time stretched on, the Delphi murders began to represent something larger than a single criminal case. They became a study in patience, endurance, and the uncomfortable reality that justice does not always move at the speed of public demand. For those watching from the outside, the waiting felt agonizing. For those living inside it, especially the families, it was relentless. Every new court filing, every sealed document, every delayed hearing brought both hope and dread. Hope that answers were finally coming. Dread that the process would reopen wounds that had never fully healed. The justice system, designed to be careful and methodical, often felt painfully slow when measured against the urgency of grief. Experts revisiting the case often pointed to the early hours after the girls disappeared as some of the most critical. Search decisions, timing, and assumptions were all scrutinized in hindsight. While no single action could be blamed outright, the case highlighted how fragile investigations can be in their earliest moments. A delay of hours can mean the difference between rescue and recovery, between fresh evidence and lost opportunity. Yet even amid critique, there was recognition of how unprecedented the situation truly was. Investigators were dealing with a crime scene in rugged terrain, limited daylight, and a flood of public attention unlike anything the town had experienced. Delphi was not equipped emotionally or logistically for what had happened, and still, they tried. The case also exposed the double-edged sword of public involvement. On one hand, tips and awareness kept pressure on authorities and ensured the girls were not forgotten. On the other, misinformation spread rapidly. Innocent people found themselves accused online, their lives disrupted by rumor and speculation. This darker side of true crime culture became impossible to ignore, forcing difficult conversations about responsibility and restraint. For Libby and Abby's families, navigating this environment required extraordinary strength. They learned to speak carefully, to grieve publicly while protecting private pain. They thanked supporters while enduring strangers who felt entitled to answers. In doing so, they became reluctant symbols of resilience, parents and grandparents forced into a role they never asked for. As the legal proceedings against Richard Allen continued, attention shifted toward the question of proof. Prosecutors emphasized consistency, placing Allen on the trail, aligning witness statements, connecting physical evidence. The defense emphasized doubt, questioning timelines, interpretations, and the reliability of memories altered by time. This tension is at the heart of every criminal trial, but in Delphi, it carried the weight of years of anticipation. Behind closed doors, judges weighed motions and evidence with precision. Each ruling shaped the future of the case. Each decision carried consequences not only for the accused, but for the families waiting for resolution. Justice, in this sense, was not a single moment. it was a long and uncertain path. Beyond the courtroom, the cultural impact of the case continued to grow. Educators, parents, and law enforcement agencies referenced Delphi when discussing personal safety and awareness. Libby's actions were used as a teaching point not to suggest responsibility for preventing crime, but to acknowledge instinct and bravery in moments of fear. Her story resonated because it was real, because it happened quickly, and because it could have happened anywhere. The Monon High Bridge itself became a place of complicated memory. Some viewed it as sacred ground, a site of loss deserving quiet respect. Others struggled with its continued existence, questioning whether it should remain open at all. Over time, discussions emerged about preservation, safety, and how communities honor places marked by tragedy. And yet, life continued. Seasons changed. Children grew older. New families moved into Delphi, learning its history alongside its routines. The town learned to carry its grief without letting it define every moment. This balance between remembrance and moving forward was delicate, imperfect, and deeply human. As the case moved closer to trial, the narrative shifted once again. Attention returned to the evidence recorded on Libby's phone. That brief clip, played countless times, remained the emotional core of the case. It was not graphic, it was not loud, but it was enough. Enough to capture a presence, enough to preserve a moment, enough to ensure the girls were never reduced to silence. In many ways, that recording transformed Libby and Abby from victims into witnesses. Their voices, literal and symbolic, became part of the pursuit of truth. It is rare for victims to leave behind something so direct, so intentional, and it is impossible to separate the case from that act of courage. As the world continues to wait for a final legal resolution, one reality remains unchanged. Justice is not only measured by verdicts and sentences. It is also measured by memory, by acknowledgement, and by the refusal to forget. Libby German and Abigail Williams are remembered not because of the violence done to them, but because of who they were and what they left behind. Their story serves as a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there can be clarity, that even in fear, there can be bravery, and that even when voices are nearly silenced, they can still echo across years, across communities, and across the conscience of everyone who listens. The Delphi murders will one day reach a legal conclusion. A verdict will be read. Appeals may follow. Headlines will fade. But the impact of that February afternoon will remain. It will live in the town that changed forever, in the families who carry loss with grace, and in the quiet understanding that vigilance, compassion, and remembrance matter. Because justice is not just about what happens in courtrooms. It is about honoring lives. And in remembering Libby German and Abigail Williams, the world continues to do exactly that. As the years passed, the Delphi case also forced a national conversation about how communities process collective trauma. In towns like Delphi, tragedy does not remain confined to police reports or court filings. It settles into daily life. It lingers in conversations at grocery stores, in the way parents watch their children a little more closely, in the silence that follows when someone mentions the bridge. The murders did not just take 2 lives. They altered the emotional landscape of an entire town. For many residents, there was a sense of guilt that accompanied the grief. A persistent, unspoken question. Could something have been noticed sooner? Could a detail, a glance, a moment of suspicion have changed the outcome? These questions rarely have answers, but they echo nonetheless. They are part of what makes crimes like this so enduring in the collective memory. Investigators, too, were changed by the case. Law enforcement officials involved would later describe it as one of the most challenging investigations of their careers, not because of a lack of effort, but because of the weight of expectation. Every decision was scrutinized. Every statement was analyzed. The presence of the video created a constant reminder of how close they were, and yet how far away justice still seemed. Behind the scenes, evidence was reviewed and re-reviewed. Advances in forensic technology offered new possibilities, even years after the crime. What once seemed insignificant could suddenly become meaningful when viewed through a different lens. This slow evolution of understanding is rarely visible to the public, but it is central to how long-term investigations survive. The case also highlighted the emotional toll placed on investigators themselves. To repeatedly watch footage taken moments before a murder, to hear a voice associated with such violence, is not without consequence. Over time, the line between professional duty and personal burden can blur. In Delphi, many of those tasked with finding answers carried that burden quietly. As discussions around the case continued, criminologists and psychologists examined the behavioral aspects of the crime. The controlled language, the setting, the apparent familiarity with the terrain, all suggested planning to some degree. Yet the randomness of encountering two teenagers on a trail introduced an element of unpredictability. This tension between planning and opportunity made the crime particularly difficult to categorize. Public fascination with the case grew not because of spectacle, but because of proximity. The Delphi murders felt uncomfortably close to everyday life. There was no remote wilderness, no shadowy alley. There was a trail, a bridge, a day off from school. Ordinary elements that became part of something extraordinary and devastating. As true crime content proliferated online, Delphi became a focal point. Podcasts dedicated entire seasons to the case. Forums debated theories late into the night. While many approached the story with respect, others crossed lines, treating speculation as entertainment. This imbalance sparked criticism and forced a reevaluation of how such stories should be told and who they are truly for. At the center of all of it remained two girls whose lives were cut short. Their families continued to emphasize this point whenever possible. They reminded the public that Libby and Abby were not mysteries to be solved, but people to be remembered. Their laughter, their personalities, their kindness, these were the truths that mattered most. As court proceedings inched forward, moments of clarity were often followed by long stretches of uncertainty. Legal processes are deliberate by design, but for those waiting for resolution, that deliberation can feel unbearable. Still, the families persisted, attending hearings, issuing statements, and maintaining a presence that spoke of quiet determination. The passage of time also changed how the case was perceived. What once felt immediate and raw began to take on the weight of history. Younger audiences encountered the story for the first time, while others revisited it with new perspective. Each retelling added another layer to its legacy. Through all of this, the image of the bridge endured. It became a symbol not only of loss, but of transition, between innocence and awareness, between normalcy and fear. For many, it represented the moment when the illusion of safety was permanently altered. Yet even in this heaviness, there was something else. A sense of collective resolve. A refusal to let the case fade into obscurity. A belief that persistence mattered, even when answers were slow to arrive. Delphi became a reminder that justice is often not swift, but it must be patient. As the legal system continues its work, the outcome remains uncertain. Verdicts may come, appeals may follow, but beyond the legal conclusions lies something deeper and more enduring. The memory of two girls whose presence, even in absence, reshaped how people think about courage, awareness, and the value of speaking even when fear is near. The story of Liberty German and Abigail Williams is not just a cautionary tale. It is a testament to the impact of ordinary people in extraordinary moments. It is proof that even the smallest actions can carry lasting meaning, and it is a reminder that remembrance itself is a form of justice. Long after the final court documents are filed, long after the cameras turn away, the echo of that day will remain not as a voice of fear, but as a call to remember, to protect, and to never allow silence to erase the truth of what happened on that bridge in Delphi. As this story reaches its end, what remains is not just a case file or a courtroom outcome, but a lasting imprint on everyone who has carried it, those who lived it, those who investigated it, and those who followed it from afar. The Delphi murders remind us that justice is not a single moment of resolution, but a long process, shaped by memory, responsibility, and the collective refusal to forget. For the families of Liberty German and Abigail Williams, the conclusion of legal proceedings, whenever it comes, will never mark an end to grief. Loss does not obey verdicts or sentences. It exists in the quiet moments, in the milestones that never arrive, in the futures imagined but never lived. And yet, within that grief, there has been extraordinary strength. Strength shown through patience, through dignity, and through a willingness to keep their daughters' names spoken with care and respect. For the town of Delphi, the story does not simply close with the passing of time. It becomes part of the town's identity, woven into its history, its caution, and its compassion. The bridge, the trail, the creek, all remain, no longer just landmarks, but reminders. Not reminders of fear alone, but of awareness, of how fragile normalcy can be, and how important it is to protect it. For the wider world, the Delphi case stands as a defining example of how modern technology intersects with human instinct. A phone, a few seconds of video, a voice captured in motion, these fragments became the foundation of a pursuit that spanned years. They serve as a quiet but powerful lesson that presence of mind, even in moments of fear, can leave behind truth when voices are nearly silenced. Libby German's final act was not one of panic, but of awareness. It was not dramatic or loud. It was subtle, instinctive, and brave. And in that bravery, she ensured that what happened on that bridge would never be erased, never dismissed, and never reduced to rumor. Alongside her, Abigail Williams remains remembered not only as a victim, but as a child whose life mattered deeply to her family, to her friends, and to a world that came to know her name far too late. As time moves forward, the details of this case may fade for some. Headlines will change. New stories will emerge. But the essence of what happened in Delphi endures because it speaks to something universal: the vulnerability of innocence, the importance of vigilance, and the responsibility we share to protect one another. Justice, when it arrives, will not restore what was lost, but it can affirm that lives taken mattered, that silence did not win, that truth, though delayed, was not denied. And so, as this story closes, it does so not with finality, but with remembrance. With the understanding that some stories are never truly over. They live on in lessons learned, in lives changed, and in names